The fruit seller who fixed my car was my husband's first son. His mother ruined our marriage. My car broke down on a dusty road in Aba, and the young fruit seller who fixed it for free had my husband's exact eyes, his exact jawline, even the same small scar above his left eyebrow. I didn't know it yet, but I had just met my husband's first son, a boy his own mother had convinced him never existed. If you love stories where the truth hides in the most unexpected places, stay with me and subscribe to Echoes of African Truth, because what I uncovered after that day destroyed everything I thought I knew about the man I married. My name is Chiamaka. I have been married to Obina for 6 years, a marriage that, from the outside, looked like the kind of love story people write songs about. We met at a wedding in Owerri. He swept me off my feet within months, and his family welcomed me with open arms, especially his mother, Mama Beatrice, a woman known throughout our extended family for her generosity and her sharp, watchful eyes that seemed to notice everything before anyone else did. That afternoon in Aba, I had driven down for a business meeting when my car sputtered and died on a quiet stretch of road lined with fruit stalls and roadside mechanics. I stepped out, frustrated, sweating under the afternoon sun, when a young man in his early 20s approached, wiping his hands on a rag stained with engine oil. "Let me look at it, ma," he said politely. "I sell fruits here, but I also fix small car problems. My uncle taught me before he traveled." I almost refused, worried about being overcharged by a stranger, but something about his calm confidence made me agree. As he leaned over the open hood, sweat gleaming on his forehead, I found myself staring at him longer than I should have. There was something disturbingly familiar about his face, though I couldn't place why. When he finally straightened up and smiled, wiping his hands again, that scar above his left eyebrow caught the sunlight, and my stomach tightened in a way I couldn't explain. "It's fixed, ma," he said. "Just a loose connection. No need to pay me. My mother always says never take money from someone who looks tired already." I insisted, pressing a few notes into his palm, but he refused firmly, almost as if accepting money from me specifically felt wrong to him. I thanked him and drove off, but that face stayed with me the entire drive home, gnawing at something in the back of my mind I couldn't quite reach. That night, while Obina sat across from me at dinner, scrolling through his phone the way he always did, I mentioned the incident casually. "You won't believe the young mechanic who fixed my car today. He looked so much like you, it was almost eerie." Obina's fork paused mid-air for just a second most people would have missed. But I was watching, the same way I had been watching that boy's familiar face hours earlier. "People have doubles everywhere," he said, his voice a touch too casual. But we weren't in Lagos. We were talking about Aba, and I hadn't mentioned where the encounter happened. If you're someone who notices the small details other people miss, this story is exactly for you. So make sure you're subscribed, because that one slip of the tongue was only the beginning of everything unraveling. I didn't confront him immediately. 6 years of marriage teaches you to read the difference between a man who is simply distracted and a man who is hiding something behind his eyes. Obina had the second look, the guarded, careful look of someone choosing his words with unusual precision. I decided to dig quietly instead, starting with the one memory that had been bothering me since dinner, the scar above the boy's eyebrow, identical in shape and placement to the small scar Obina carried from a childhood bicycle accident he loved to tell people about. 2 weeks later, I found an excuse to travel back to Aba, telling Obina I had another business meeting. I returned to that same stretch of road, and there he was, again, arranging oranges into neat pyramids on his wooden stall. His name, I learnt that day, was Kelechi. I bought fruits I didn't need, just to keep the conversation going, asking careful, casual questions. He told me he had grown up in Aba with his mother, that his father had never been part of his life, that his mother rarely spoke about the man, only saying once, years ago, that his father belonged to another family and could never claim him. "What is your mother's name?" I asked, my heart hammering. "Ifeyinwa," he said. "Everyone around here calls her Mama Ife. She sells fabric 2 streets from here." I don't know what possessed me that day, but I walked those 2 streets and found her, a woman in her mid-40s with tired but striking eyes, folding wrappers behind a small wooden table. When she looked up at me, something in her expression shifted immediately, a flicker of recognition, though we had never met. "You are Obina's wife," she said, quietly, not as a question, but as a statement of fact she had clearly been dreading and expecting for years. The ground beneath me felt like it tilted. "How do you know my husband's name?" Ifeyinwa's hands trembled as she folded the wrapper in front of her more tightly than necessary, buying herself time before answering. "Because I loved him before you did," she said, "and because his mother made sure I would spend the rest of my life pretending I never did." This is where the story stopped being simple, and if you want to see exactly how deep this betrayal goes, subscribe now, because what Ifeyinwa told me next changed everything I believed about my marriage, my mother-in-law, and the family I married. Ifeyinwa invited me to sit, and over the next hour, she told me a story that reshaped everything I thought I understood about Obina and his family. 16 years ago, when Obina was a young man still building his career, he had fallen in love with Ifeyinwa, a fabric seller from a family with far less status than his own. They dated secretly for nearly 2 years, deeply in love, planning a future together despite the difference in their family standing. When Ifeyinwa became pregnant, Obina was overjoyed, determined to marry her regardless of what his family thought. But Mama Beatrice, Obina's mother, the same woman who had welcomed me into the family with warm embraces and generous gifts, saw things very differently. She believed Ifeyinwa was beneath her son, a distraction from the future she had carefully planned for him, one that involved marrying into a family with connections that could elevate their business and social standing. "She came to me alone one afternoon," Ifeyinwa said, her voice steady despite the pain clearly still living behind her eyes. "She offered me money, more money than my family had ever seen, to disappear from Obina's life completely. When I refused, she changed her approach entirely. She told me that if I truly loved her son, I would understand that staying would destroy his future, that his father's business partners would never accept a wife from a family like mine, that I would be raising a child who would forever be treated as an embarrassment rather than an heir." "And Obina?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "That is the part that still breaks something inside me even now," Ifeyinwa said. "Her mother told me I had left willingly, that I had taken money to disappear because I never truly loved him, that I chose comfort over commitment. And she told me, separately, that he had agreed to let me go, that he had chosen his family's expectations over our child. We were each fed a lie designed to make us believe the other had abandoned us." I sat frozen, absorbing the sheer calculation behind what Mama Beatrice had done, manipulating 2 young people in love into believing the worst about each other, simply to protect a vision of status and legacy she had built entirely inside her own head. "Does Obina know Kelechi exists?" I finally asked. Ifeyinwa's expression darkened further. "He does, or at least he has known for the past 4 years. My breath caught in my throat. 4 years? We have been married for 6. Kelechi found me one afternoon after school, nearly grown, asking questions about his father that I could no longer avoid answering honestly, Ifeyinwa explained. I told him everything I knew, and against my warnings, he sought Obina out himself. They met. Obina confirmed he was his father through a private paternity test, quietly, without your knowledge, and he began sending money for Kelechi's upkeep and education, again, quietly, without ever telling you or acknowledging him publicly. Every year of our marriage, I had wondered where certain unexplained withdrawals from our joint accounts had gone, and Obina always had a smooth, convincing explanation ready. Business investments, family obligations back home, expenses he handled personally so I wouldn't need to worry. I had trusted him completely. I had never imagined he was quietly funding a hidden son's entire life while building a completely different story for the wife standing beside him. If your chest is tightening the way mine was sitting across from that woman, you already understand why I need you to stay until the end of this story. And subscribing means you won't miss exactly how this family confrontation finally unfolded. I drove home in silence that night, my mind replaying 6 years of small inconsistencies I had explained away out of love and trust. I confronted Obina the moment I walked through our front door, placing a photograph Ifeyinwa had given me of Kelechi as a toddler directly on the dining table between us. His face went through every stage of denial before finally collapsing into something closer to shame. He said, "I was going to tell you eventually. I just didn't know how without destroying everything we built together." I said, "You didn't just hide a son from me," my voice shaking with an anger I had never directed at him before. "You let your mother manipulate 2 young lovers into abandoning each other, and then you spent 4 years quietly funding a secret life while pretending our marriage was built on honesty." "My mother told me Ifeyinwa left because she chose money over me," Obina said, his voice breaking. "I believed her for years, Chamaka. I only discovered the truth when Kelechi came looking for me himself." "And instead of telling me then," I said, "you chose to keep protecting a lie your own mother constructed because admitting the truth meant admitting how deeply she had controlled your entire life." He had no answer for that because there was none that could soften what he had done. The confrontation with Mama Beatrice happened 3 days later during a family gathering none of us could have predicted would become the moment everything finally broke into the open. Ifeyinwa, at my quiet invitation, arrived with Kelechi, walking into a family compound that had spent 16 years believing she simply vanished out of greed. Mama Beatrice's composed expression shattered the moment she saw them standing at the gate. For a woman who had spent decades controlling every narrative within her family, watching the consequences of her manipulation walk directly into her home was something she clearly never prepared herself for. "You," she said, her voice trembling, directed at Ifeyinwa, "why have you come here?" "Because your grandson deserves to know his family," Ifeyinwa said, standing firm despite the tension radiating through the compound. "And because I am tired of carrying the weight of a lie you built to protect an image of status that meant nothing to the 2 people whose lives you destroyed." The extended family, gathered for what was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday visit, slowly began to piece together fragments of a story none of them had ever known existed. Aunts who had praised Mama Beatrice's wisdom for years stood in stunned silence. Uncles who respected her sharp instincts now looked at her with expressions caught somewhere between disbelief and quiet judgment. "I did what I believed was best for this family," Mama Beatrice finally said, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. "Ifeyinwa's family had nothing to offer. I could not watch my son build a future on instability." "You didn't protect this family," Obina said, stepping forward, his voice steady, despite everything shining behind his eyes. You built it on a foundation of lies so deep that I spent 16 years believing the woman I loved abandoned me, and my son spent his entire childhood believing his father chose to abandon him too. Kelechi, who had remained quiet throughout the entire exchange, finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying a weight far beyond his years. I never wanted money or status. I only wanted to know why my father never came looking for me. Now, I understand it was never really his choice to make freely. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had come before it. A family finally confronting the true cost of a manipulation none of them had been allowed to see clearly until that moment. In the weeks that followed, our family did not simply return to normal because normal had never truly existed. It had only ever been a carefully constructed illusion. Obina and I spent months in difficult, honest conversations, rebuilding trust from a foundation that finally had no more hidden rooms left to discover. It was not easy. There were nights I doubted whether our marriage could survive the weight of everything uncovered, and nights Obina doubted whether he deserved my forgiveness at all. But slowly, something real began to grow in place of everything false. Obina formally acknowledged Kelechi before the entire family, ensuring he received the same recognition, respect, and inheritance rights as any other child born into the Eze household. Ifeyinwa, though she never fully reconciled with Mama Beatrice, found a quiet peace in finally having her son's paternity recognized openly, without secrecy or shame attached to it. Mama Beatrice, for her part, spent the following year in an unusually humbled silence, attending family gatherings with far less authority than she once commanded. It took nearly 2 years before Kelechi allowed himself to visit the family compound without visible tension, and even longer before genuine warmth began to replace the careful distance between him and the grandmother who had once tried to erase his entire existence entirely. As for me, I chose to stay in my marriage. Not because the betrayal didn't hurt deeply, but because I watched Obina spend every day afterward, proving through consistent honesty rather than empty promises that he understood exactly how much his silence had cost everyone involved. Kelechi became a regular presence in our home, eventually stepping away from his fruit stall in Aba to study mechanical engineering, a path that felt fitting for the young man whose skilled hands unknowingly unraveled his entire family's carefully hidden history the day he fixed a stranger's broken-down car. Looking back now, I understand that the day my car broke down on that dusty road in Aba was never really an accident. It was the moment truth found a crack in a lie that had been sealed shut for 16 years, waiting patiently for the right stranger to stumble into it. If this story taught you anything about how deeply the people we trust most can shape the truths we live by, then you already understand why stories like this deserve to be shared. Subscribe to this channel because every family carries buried truths, and every day we bring the ones brave enough to finally surface into the light.